Hey friends, I just want to let you know before this episode begins that the audio on it is not everything I would hope that audio would be. I accidentally switched to my earbud audio when I plugged them in, not realizing it, instead of using my mic like I normally do. However, the content with my guests today is so good and I didn't want to scrap it. And so I'm asking for grace on this episode as there's some distracting noises with my hair hitting the earbuds that I have in. And I promise you we will be back to clear, crisp audio and our regularly scheduled program next time. Thank you so much for bearing with us. Hello and welcome to the MS for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abbie Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian. And on today's episode, I have such a good guest for you. She is going to be full of so much information and so much encouragement for you as moms, or even just those that listen to me, moms, dads, those that are not parents. Just such good, meaty stuff coming at you today. I also want to highlight our podcast sponsors. First up, we have Voetberg Music Academy. You guys know that we love the Voetberg family and their approach to song-based, notes-based learning that gets your kids to jump right in and be excited about learning music. You can share lessons between siblings, and in doing that, your lessons are often as little as $30 a month, which is so much lower than the hundreds of dollars a month per student that so many parents pay. You can use the code MSROMA20 for 20% off every month that you're enrolled in lessons in guitar, mandolin, ukulele, fiddle, or piano. And you can enjoy the fact that they have seasonal challenges and ways to advance and encourage and get your students motivated to learn, all built into the Voetberg Music Academy method. Use the code MSROMA20 for 20% off. I also want to talk about Adel Natural Cosmetics, a family-owned, Texas-based, happily pro-life Christian company who focuses on creating products from nutrient-dense, locally grown ingredients. One of my personal favorite products, because I do use their products, is their Blue Tansy Face Balm, which is infused with Blue Tansy essential oil, which is known for its anti-inflammatory qualities and just feels so wonderful on your skin. You can use the code MS4Mama for 25% off your first order with Adel. And finally, I want to talk about my friend Corey from Good McMom. I had her on the podcast, and she is such an amazing resource for discovering quality books for your kids. She has curated book lists that she offers from ages 0 to 12 that have a biblical worldview, and you can use the code Abbie5 for $5 off each month that you're enrolled, or Abbie75 to get a yearly all-access subscription for just $75. Okay, friends, I told you we were going to have an amazing episode, and we indeed are with my friend Alexandra from Just the Inserts. She is here to just clear up your questions on medical consent and informed health decisions and things that are on the inserts that nobody's actually reading, right? So, Alexandra, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell our listeners, watchers, whoever all is here, kind of who you are, what you do, and how you got into it?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I love mother podcasts because I'm a mother myself. I have 3 young children. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 10-month-old. So I am in the thick of it along with you, and I'm sure everyone listening right now. And this is such an important topic to talk about. It can be very taboo. It can be very polarizing, but my mission is all about informed consent. It's all about educating parents and patients to make informed medical decisions, whether you accept that product, delay that product, or decline that product. My goal is never to sway you to accept, delay, or decline a certain product, even if I might do a different decision than you do. I just want you to have the information that's available from the manufacturers and from the government. So it all started when I was pregnant with my first child. I had already started going toward a more natural route. I had done 5 years in the military, and then I got out of the military and needed to kind of detox from government bureaucracy, and I became a yoga teacher. Well, that didn't work out so well, so then I went a Pure Barre teacher, and then I got pregnant, and I started researching just all the products that I use on my body, in my home, and realizing that the products that are conventionally available may not be the best for me, may not be the best for my baby. So I had really desired to have a natural childbirth, but I wasn't prepared to do anything at home. That was a little too crazy for me, which is funny because now I've had 2 home births. But at that time, I wasn't ready for that. And so I found a birthing center attached to a hospital. And the midwives there, I remember I was pregnant in my 3rd trimester, and they handed me a 1-page sheet for Tdap vaccine. That's the vaccine that they give to mothers to produce antibodies, to pass on those antibodies to your baby to prevent whooping cough or pertussis. And I remember thinking, this just seems very odd to me to inject a pregnant woman. It just didn't sit well with me. I wasn't against the products. I just wanted to do more research. And at that time, I had asked my mom to research for me because I was just research fatigued of everything that you have to research as a new parent. I'm sure everyone listening can resonate with that. And I asked my mom to research, and she came back with just so much emotionally fear-based information that my brain just shut off. I couldn't respond to what she was saying because it was the camp of, if you accept this product, your baby's going to die, you're going to die. And if you don't accept this product, your baby's going to die and you're going to die. And I just was very turned off by how polarizing it was. So to kind of prove my mom wrong, I started finding manufacturer inserts. And those are the legal documents for vaccines and pharmaceuticals, like the synthetic vitamin K injection, the antibiotic that's given. The eye ointment to babies also has an insert. So all pharmaceuticals on the market, if it's a prescription or a vaccine, has a manufacturer insert. Okay. So I ended up finding them, and I was completely floored.
When you say finding them, I know there's probably a lot of listeners going like, "Well, okay, how would I do the same thing? Like, how much searching did you have to do?"
Well, they're not very well marketed. They're all on the FDA website. So if you type in, let's talk about vaccines. If you type in uslicensedvaccines.gov, an FDA website will pop up, and it's all of the vaccines that have been approved to be on the market in the United States. Okay. It is very hard to navigate because they are listed by trade name. So those are the marketing names that the manufacturers give, or generic names. And that might be the type of vaccine. So it could be like a live vaccine. It could be an inactivated vaccine. It could be drops in the mouth. So you really have to know what you're looking for. And it can be very confusing, which is why I eventually created just the inserts to make it easier for other parents and patients to find this information. 99.9% of my resources are sourced from .gov websites, and it's really just streamlining everything that I did, because I was just looking at all the .gov resources, being completely overwhelmed and trying to organize it in my brain of, okay, how does a product come to market? Who touches it before it comes to market? What do they have to know in clinical trials? What isn't known in clinical trials? What are some things that have to happen after the product goes to market to report adverse reactions? And the really important thing, if anybody is listening right now and you absolutely are for pharmaceuticals and different products, that's great. If my entire audience accepted products, I'd be happy, because there are parts of the insert that are really important for you to know if you accept the product, to eliminate diagnostic confusion, to expedite treatment should an adverse reaction happen, or just general knowledge that the manufacturer knows that maybe if you have these adverse reactions like gastro issues or hives or fainting or anything like that, maybe you need to adjust your dosage. Maybe you need to find a different product with maybe not that excipient, which is another ingredient in that product. So even if you do accept it, I still want you to read the inserts. And while all of this was happening with vaccines, I ended up accepting this synthetic vitamin K injection when my daughter was born. I had a 44-hour labor, really traumatic, really horrible. Can't believe I had 2 more kids after that. I think there's a mechanism that God put in our brain where we tend to forget the intricacies of our births, because if not, we would only have 1 child.
Probably. Yeah, very true.
Yeah. And so I remember thinking I needed to accept this product. It was kind of forced on me in the hospital. And unfortunately, she had an adverse reaction to it. We spent thousands of dollars, and lots of medical professionals told me that they couldn't treat her unless we followed the vaccine schedule. So I knew she had already been injured. I wasn't willing to accept any other interventions. And it just really exposed me to the industry as a whole. And it really got me digging. And the more that I shared my research online, the more medical professionals validated everything that I was finding. And I wasn't prepared for that. I was prepared for parents to research and to contact me and say thank you, for putting all this together because it saved me time. But I wasn't prepared for the nurses, the doctors, the pharmacists, the infectious disease scientists that would reach out to me and say, this is so true. I never knew this. I was never taught this in school. This is mind-blowing to me that this is sitting on the CDC, FDA, NIH websites, and I didn't know about it.
Okay, let's talk about that for a minute. Because
Definitely.
I think you are absolutely, I loved what you said at the beginning about how when your mom presented you a certain kind of research, maybe some of it's research, some of it's maybe air quotes research, where it's like, okay, we jumped from one thought
A
to a
lot of assumptions.
correlation and made a lot of assumptions. But that I really get turned off by the everybody's going to die, poison, poison, poison. The government is definitely out to get everybody type of thing because it is so extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, there are times when it becomes very evident from these medical professionals who then come out of the woodworks and say what they were actually taught about nutrition or about vaccines or about birth control. And it becomes almost shocking to
Yes.
discover how little time in their extensive education that is very legitimate. They are
Mm-hmm.
taught so many things so thoroughly. How much or how little time was spent in some of these really key areas. Can you kind of talk about that?
Absolutely. So, this is something that I didn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole when I first started researching because it was so polarizing. And I felt that that was a very knee jerk response for a lot of the comment sections that I happened to peruse when I was researching because I was just genuinely interested in the industry. I have a business background and I was just trying to understand the structure of it. I grew up military. My mom, my dad, and my stepdad were all military. I was military. And so I originally thought that vaccines were a government product. I didn't realize that there was a private entity behind it that was producing it, profiting from it. And so
Mm,
when I started researching, my business brain kind of shut on, and I started to realize that the way that the business structure is managed, was created and managed, is very flawed, in my opinion. And it can encourage avenues of potential financial conflict of interest. And I think when we
mm,
start to approach that line, it can be very conspiratorial. It can be very, oh, well, my pediatrician is great. They're wonderful. They just want to help people. How dare you say that there could be a potential financial conflict of interest? And I get
sure.
that because I have pediatricians in my DMs saying they are bound to the insurance companies. They're bound to the private memberships that they're a part of because of the way that their business is structured.
Mm,
Many of them are excellent medical professionals, but they're not good at business. And unfortunately, the way that the business has been set up, they can't spend more than 15 minutes with you. They can't talk to you about your vaccine hesitant feelings because it's the I was talking with a friend of mine and I said it's almost death by efficiency. The profession has lost their ability to accomplish what they desire and maybe what they dedicated most of their adult life to because of efficiency, the way that
yeah,
they are structured. So a lot of what I go into, and I cite everything. I think it's very important for you to verify what you see on the internet. There are plenty of times where people have messaged me things and I say, oh, that's really interesting. I would love to read more. Can you provide a resource? .gov would be incredible if you could find one. And so many times on both sides, they aren't able to produce that for me. It's
sure.
just something that they happen to read and I think that's important. I think that we should validate things. And that's why I make that transparency is a huge value of what I do. But yeah, I cite that many of the people that are on the CDC panel to approve vaccines to be added to the childhood vaccination schedule have ties with pharmaceutical companies, are receiving financial incentives for approving products. And the waiver process is actually quite flimsy, in my opinion. Being a previous government employee, we were hounded on potential financial conflicts of interest. And when I look at that and I evaluate that, there are definitely a lot of flaws. So
Mm,
we could spend 3 hours talking about all of that, but there are definitely some concerns as an informed consumer you need to be aware of at the federal level and at the clinician level. There are incentive programs for pediatricians that they can opt into. Not every single one is. I get messages too from people saying, I don't make money off my giving vaccines. And that might be true depending on how their insurance model is set up or where they're operating. They might not be getting that incentive. Maybe the hospital, if they're in a big network. It just depends on, it's different by state as well. But yeah, it's just something as a parent, especially if you go into an office, a doctor's or pediatrician's office, and you start to get that judgment, maybe some hostility, maybe they're getting emotional about the decisions that you want to make with you or your child. That is just something for you to be aware of so that you don't take it personally. And I myself have felt that consumer guilt that I don't want to inconvenience the medical professional by asking a bunch of questions, but it's your right to.
Yeah.
Informed consent is the foundational element of all medical decisions. You have that right to get all the information that you need to make a well-considered decision.
Absolutely. And that doesn't just apply to vaccines. So if anybody has been listening to the first 10 or so minutes of this and thinking, okay, we have a couple of anti-vaccine, deniers on our hands. I don't think that they could get that from what you've said so far. You absolutely sound as if you're saying it is an individual decision. You're just hoping that each individual has what they need to make that decision. But there are so many other areas of health in which informed consent seems like it is swept under the rug. Other than vaccines, kind of what are some of the big ones that you see?
Labor and delivery drugs, a lot of them. I actually was speaking with a L&D nurse and a NICU nurse simultaneously at the same time. And we were talking about how so many of these inserts have adverse reactions of anxiety and depression listed on them. They're routinely given to women. And according to the NIH, I believe it was 1 out of 8 women experience postpartum depression. And here these drugs are being recommended. They're best practices. They're used in hospitals across the United States. And women aren't told that this could potentially affect your breastfeeding experience. This could potentially lead to postpartum depression. I think that's a really big issue. Pregnant women as well. I believe it's 1 out of 8 women, 9 out of 10 women in the United States have at least one medication while they're pregnant. But according to the CDC, less than 10% of medications have been studied to properly assess fetal risks.
Right, because I feel like that's one of those like chicken, egg, almost impossible conundrums, because what mindful mom would volunteer herself to be the guinea pig for these studies? And I know that you can do them literally on lab rats and animals, but we aren't rats, and we should still have that hesitancy to volunteer ourselves for something that could have adverse effects on our baby. So I absolutely can see why it's so difficult to get definitive answers on even supplements. I get asked constantly, would you take this? And of course, that's such a scary question, because even if I have done my due diligence and I personally have come to a place where I say, I think I would be okay with taking this, I also know my body's chemistry better than I know anyone else's. I know my health practices. I know some of my health limitations from living in this body for 42 years, right? And so it's not one of those things where you can say, oh, 100%, take this supplement, take this product, one size fits all, because if it works for me, it should work for you, right?
Right. Well, and also too, it might not work for you at the next pregnancy. Maybe your nutrients have been depleted from having 2 kids. I know my 3rd pregnancy looked way different than my 1st pregnancy. And so a supplement or a pharmaceutical that you take in the first one, it might not, it's called a mechanism of action. It might not work the same way in your body because maybe you have, blood thinners, or maybe you're on something anti-seizure medications, or maybe your gut flora isn't as robust as it was before because you're busy taking care of toddlers and you can only have highly processed
the scraps
foods
off of their plates. Yeah.
Getting those little dino chicken nuggets, that's your lunch. So maybe you're, the way. I think it's really important for people to understand that your biology is so unique to you. The way that God designed us is actually incredible, because you could take you where you are right now and then put you in a different part of the United States or the world, and it would be a different you. Your interactions in the environment, your stress levels, what you experience. I live outside of Washington, D.C. Every single time I get in the car, I'm stressed because there's traffic everywhere and people are crazy.
Yeah.
And so that's something that it's so hard. I don't believe in absolutes in healthcare. I don't believe that chiropractic care is for everyone, or I don't believe home birth is for everyone, or I don't believe pharmaceuticals are for everyone. I don't believe C-sections are for everyone. My goal in everything that I do is that you have all the information that is known and that is publicly available on .gov resources so that you can take that information, you can put it through your own filter of your own biology, your own chemistry, your own environment, and see, does this product make sense for me? Does this product make sense for my child, for my family?
Well, and I know one thing that is going to be popping into many, many brains right now because it pops into mine is that one aspect of kind of the wellness community that I think a lot of people find very frustrating is the do your own research. Like, I've just given you the starting point. Now do your own research. And of course, people are like, well, is an internet search a trustworthy thing to do? Um, like, am I going to get what I need? Is this book vetted well? Is this book paid for by a company? Are there vested interests in the research that they're showing me and the research that they're maybe making harder to find? Like, how in the world would I possibly do that? And then the second question that I feel like people are asking is, or the second thing that I often hear from kind of the wellness community is, oh, you got this, mama, trust your instincts. And you have a whole lot of moms that are like, I don't have those. Like, I think instincts, while God given, are also ingrained in us through training. And I think there is an absolute wasteland of information from parents passed down. Whereas in our past, one, what you were saying is exactly right. If we go somewhere different, we react differently with our environment. It can affect our stress levels. We're a different us. Completely agree. There would have been, to some extent, less moving around than we have now in the past, simply because of transportation. We're talking about the past where we didn't have the Industrial Revolution. So you have people that were probably born and raised in one spot. You also have people that were given more than the basics of how to grow food, ferment food, animal husbandry, all of these things. And we've lost so much of this. And I know people that have moved 13 times, and they probably are completely upside down and backwards with their histamines and their reactions to their environment and their gut and their mental state because of their gut and all of these things. So I know this isn't necessarily under your main purview, but can you talk about what it looks like when you say your own biology and people are like, but I really don't?
Yeah, that's you hit so many nails on the head. I just feel like I can pack up and leave right now. You did such a great job. So the first thing that I want to address is, it is really hard. It's so hard. And even if you stick at the medical professional level, so if you only receive insight from medical professionals, they don't even agree. For the 5 doctors that you can find that say, yes, this product is absolutely safe, it's perfect for this condition, you're going to find 5 doctors that say the opposite. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to find 5 other doctors that say, no, use this instead. It is very overwhelming. And so my best advice is to not hitch your bandwagon onto just one. If you do have that mental ability, I know this is really hard to do after postpartum. I don't want to hear anything from anyone after having a baby because I just can't properly process all that information. But if you could find a few different people that might have varying opinions and follow them and just see what they say, see how they interact. At least that's what helps for me at the medical level. And then for pharmaceutical level, when we're researching different drugs, over-the-counters, prescriptions, vaccines, things like that, the inserts, the manufacturers are the most intimate with their products. They're the most knowledgeable on how their product works, the limitations of that product, what ingredients are in that product, how it interacts with the pregnant population, geriatric population, pediatric population, how the different adverse reactions that were reported in clinical trials after the product came to market. So that's the next best thing, in my opinion. And obviously, I built an entire website, Instagram, around it, and wrote the book, did a free training course, because I think it's so important to be an informed consumer and know what the manufacturers say. So many products that we research, if you go out and get a car, you're going to go to the Ford website or the Hyundai website. You're going to read all the specs. You're going to read all these different things about it. And then maybe the regulatory bodies or consumer reports, you're going to go to that and then read about that car's safety. The other day, I say this all the time, but I actually do research toothbrushes before I purchase them because I have sensitive gums. And so I want to read the toothbrush and I want to see, how does this work with enamel? There are so many things in our available in our marketplace that we research. It's the same thing with medical products. It can be really overwhelming because we're not really empowered to do that by our public health campaigns. We're kind of just told, trust the experts and don't question anything.
Right.
And that's not true. We shouldn't allow that. We need to be more proactive. And then what was the second part? I don't want to miss it because you did such a good job explaining it.
I think I was saying, like, kind of, you say we know our own biology, but we kind of don't.
Yeah, exactly. So I personally believe too that the second that you become a parent, you are gifted an intuition by God, and that intuition grows as a parent. Now, unfortunately, I think the reason why many of us don't feel like we have that intuition is because literally the first experience that we have as parents, when we find out that we're pregnant, is with a medical professional, either with an ultrasound or a blood test or urine test. They're the ones confirming that we're pregnant. And most of the time that follows a process of the medical professional saying, these are all the things that you need to do. You need to take a prenatal with folic acid. You need to do these. You need to avoid these things. They hand you out all these sheets. And so your first experience is, oh, I'm not smart enough to make these decisions.
Sure.
I need to rely upon it. And I want to be very clear and very careful when I say this, because it's wonderful to get expert advice. Yeah. I'm not downplaying that at all. I think that it's really important to seek that advice for those that have done that research. However, don't abdicate your authority and kind of outsource that research to other people. Yeah. Still learn about it yourself. And then as you do, that intuition will grow inside of you. And everybody has that. I believe it can be nurtured and cultivated. I don't think it's forever stripped from you. I think that as parents, we are granted stewardship over our bodies and over our children's bodies. And that's something that is divine, in my opinion, and that we can seek that facilitation in prayer and just doing research. And many of the times I have a free training course called How to Read an Insert. So for anybody wondering, you're telling me all of this, but how do I do it? I go step by step, and it takes about 2 to 3 hours to go through. It's free. Actually, Elizabeth from Purely Parsons, she reviewed it before I launched it a few years ago, and she was fantastic as a pediatric RN. I really value her insight into things. And I go through how to find the inserts, how to read the inserts, each step of the insert. It can be really overwhelming, but I take screenshots, I cite everything. I even have optional audio in Spanish and English. So I make it as easy as possible. And I even tested it while breastfeeding, so you could do it one-handed if you needed to.
You've covered all of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because it does cover a lot of different things of why someone might be hesitant to do this research, but hopefully I've made it as easy as possible. It's everything I wish I would have had when I first started researching.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna jump back to one thing you said, because I'm pretty sure I know what you meant, but I will probably get a message if I don't clarify. You said something about something being divine. I think you meant divinely given.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Thank you.
We in and of ourselves are not. We don't have any divinity.
Thank you for clarifying. That is not what I meant.
Yeah, I didn't think so, based on what I know about you.
No.
You mentioned your book. Tell us some about that.
Yes. So I did my free training course, and I realized that despite what we're told, the internet isn't forever. And I wanted to make sure that I had it into a physical book that I could hand out to people if they needed to have the research or if they wanted to have it on their bookshelf. And so I wrote it actually right after I had my third baby last
No big
spring.
deal. Just have a baby and write a book. Why not?
Yeah, exactly.
I say I've definitely done it.
I know. I was about to say, I feel like you know exactly what that feels.
I do.
Actually, it was
I do.
so easy when she was a newborn because I just breastfed. She
That's
was
true.
just on the boppy, and I just typed, while she was breastfeeding. I wouldn't be able to do it now. She's crawling all over the place. But I realized it was important that I just needed to have this resource available to people that wanted it, and it's been fantastic. I've had so many medical professionals that have bought it for their lending library in their
That's
office,
amazing.
and they give it to their patients because they love it too. They want patients that are proactive.
Yeah, and that is what every medical professional should want.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there are two camps. I just stumbled on an account that's kind of the opposite of the wellness girly movement, which of course has its issues. And it was basically saying, of course we trust the experts because they're the experts. They went to school. They know everything. And then you have the opposite end of the spectrum that's like, of course we don't trust the experts because they've been propagandized and indoctrinated by only one way of thinking and they're not truly experts. And I think what you're advocating for is somewhere in the middle, which honors the effort and education that someone has received. And I mean, you would be an expert at this point on reading inserts because it's a passion of yours. It's something that has grown to be a job. It is something you take seriously. So I think that we can find this middle ground of more objectivity and less emotional reasoning of saying your expert status is valuable, but it does not have to be given to you by an established entity necessarily.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, well, I talk a lot about logical fallacies, mostly because I see that all the time by the medical and scientific communities, and I don't think they realize that they do that, but it does happen a lot. And I'm speaking from the medical professionals who have contacted me and shared the behind the scenes stories that they tell me in the break rooms and things like that. And a lot of it is an appeal to authority, and I think on the opposite spectrum, it can be also like the not appeal to authority, which isn't technically a logical fallacy. But if an authority figure is stating a fact and you automatically say, oh, that's not true, that's a logical fallacy too.
Yes.
They might be saying something's true. You just need to verify it for yourself. I don't think we should blindly trust anybody. So I do see that though. And even in some of my DMs and some of the comments, I try to address that as well. I'll get the comment that says, well, every single vaccine says that death is a adverse reaction. And that's not true. According to the manufacturer inserts, there are inserts that don't have death. You could argue that some of the adverse reactions could potentially be, complications of those adverse reactions could be fatal, but it doesn't explicitly say that in the insert. And so I do try to be as factual as possible for anybody because it's important. Details matter, facts matter, and it's important for us to be level-headed when we have these conversations because you can be tossed in the waves and you can just suffer from whiplash with the different perspectives that people have, very emotionally driven perspectives.
Yes. What is the name of your book? I think I know the answer. And where can people find it?
Well Considered, a handbook for making informed medical decisions.
Yep. Okay. And Amazon?
JustTheInserts.com. Everything's at Just the Inserts.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Amazon has fine print where if they deem your information harmful, that they can pull it or they can keep it and not give you royalties. So I just decided, let's keep it simple. Have it all at JustTheInserts.com.
That's a great idea because I do think that because of that narrative or that conversation that we were having around vested interests, you do have people that are able to label things harmful that are just informative, which is very much so your heart, I believe. And yeah, you want to be careful what you do with all that hard work that you put into this. I told you before we started that I wanted to address one particular type of product because I have talked before, people find out that I have 10 kids and one, they fall on the floor. Two, they pick themselves up and they say, depending on what generation, what gender, and their level of social efficiency, I would say, they either say something like, don't you know what causes that? don't you have a TV? Or wow, I could never, or good for
Rude
you. I
comments.
know, I know, I know. I mean, it kind of tends to start with that. Although I will say, interestingly enough, that the more I've had and the older I get and the older my kids are, the fewer rude comments I get. I think people feel the most empowered with young moms and young children, which is real,
Mhm.
the most empowered to be rude, which is really sad because
Mhm.
I do feel like those are the women that are needing the most encouragement and support
Yeah.
as they're investing in their children as opposed to disdain. But that's okay. We can't control society.
Mhm.
But then, and there are definitely quite a few that are like, wow, that's amazing. That's awesome. I'm so happy for you. So it's not all rude comments. But understandably, a lot of people don't expect me to be a birth control advocate or aficionado because if I were, I would be really, really bad at it. And one of the reasons why they're absolutely correct, I am not, is because my mom herself, kind of a 90s homeschool crunchy mom, um, was very informed and was very aware of potential side effects of birth control pills and hormonal birth control. And so when I tell people that one of my main concerns, beyond even the adverse responses that 50% of women have to many birth control hormonal pills, is the abortifacient quality of birth control, where one of its functions is to make the lining of the uterus hostile to the implantation of an embryo. And I truly believe life begins at the moment of fertilization and is imbued by God with value immediately upon that moment. And so I don't want any babies to be flushed out of me because of something that I put in my body knowingly. And so many people are saying like, I didn't know that. Where did you find that out? Can you speak to this?
Yeah, no, it's really important for, especially for religious reasons, to understand how products work. And you're right. Many of them do thicken the cervical mucus, or they might prevent releasing of certain hormones that would feed an implanted, baby, and so basically starving the baby. And
Mm,
it's really important to understand too that manufacturers for birth control state that they are not 100% effective. So
sure.
here you might have, and I know I know a few people that have gotten pregnant on birth
Same.
control,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, according to the inserts, they disclose that that baby, if it's not, if the birth control is not effective, could suffer lifelong um, issues.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of the birth control inserts also state about ectopic pregnancies, and they could lead to further miscarriages down the road, and it could actually potentially cause infertility down the road. And I think that's really important if you are being recommended birth control, especially for things that like acne or hormone regulation. You need to be aware of that because that could be affecting your entire fertility journey.
Yeah.
And many people aren't told that, especially for the implantations that go in your arm, or some of the copper IUDs or things like that.
Yep.
Sometimes they don't stay where they're supposed to, and so they can
Yeah.
actually cause other harms to your body.
Yeah,
And
I just ran across several accounts that were talking about copper IUD migration, and
mhm.
they get lodged in other tissues, and
Yeah.
man, have caused some serious problems. That's scary.
Yeah, and it's all in the inserts. And that's what's crazy to me, is that it's not widely discussed by the medical community, that it is kind of one of those things that has been assumed to be safe and kind of this magic pill for all of our ailments. And I think we're starting to see that that's not true. Also, the neurotransmitters, for hormonal birth control, I believe, in my own personal opinion, on the research that I've done, has contributed to a lot of our mental health issues,
Mm,
with depression and anxiety, and some of the other things that are ravaging our society. When I was a younger, that's when birth control kind of blew up. Or at least it was continuing. I remember it constantly being pushed on me when I was in college, even though I wasn't, sexually active. And so it's one of those things that I really wish that there was more informed consent on, because it's so easily prescribed, and there's a
yeah,
lot more that the manufacturers and government know about it.
right. Well, and years ago, we're talking like probably 20 plus, when I was a very young woman, very newly married, I actually was doing tons of reading and research on birth control, I already knew from what my mom had taught me and the research that I'd done that I didn't want to put that in my body. But I kept being shocked more and more by what I was reading. And one of them was that, and this pertains to what you were talking about with using it for acne or for managing difficult period symptoms or things like that with very young girls and women who are just starting out in their fertility journeys, was that the longer that you're on it before you have a baby yourself, the more harmful the side effects are, because it's almost as if, I mean, this is very much so layman's terms, and I cannot quote you. I remember reading many articles on it, but it's been years. But it's the idea of kind of your body resetting itself with its own fertility once you've had a baby, and that while not still having adverse effects or potentially doing so, that they're not necessarily as harmful. And then you have these girls that are on it from 13 to 28 sometimes.
Yeah.
And you're right. What may sound like fear mongering to some is just stuff that's actually listed as things that you should be told up front, because it would make people pause. It would make moms pause who are about to put their daughters on something if they knew that it might end up with PCOS or endometriosis in the future, or higher chances of certain kinds of cancer, or higher chances of infertility. And then what you were talking about with the epidemic of mental health issues that we have, that was the other, I mentioned the 50%. I remember seeing that statistic and going, wait, what? That medical professionals have talked about in their peer-reviewed articles, that 50% of the female population that goes on hormonal birth control has such a strong reaction from an emotional or mental perspective that they get themselves off of it because they don't recognize themselves anymore, or they have suicidal ideations or depressive episodes. And that's all really scary stuff that you don't have to fearmonger. You just have to lay it on the table for people to be able to say, well, maybe it is worth it to me, but maybe it isn't. But at least you should know.
Right. I have several providers that have contacted me, and they specialize, their entire practice is specialized in treating women that have been harmed by birth control and trying to get a period back and trying to basically save their fertility, because their hormones are just tanked and they can't produce them on their own, because their bodies from the get-go of puberty, they've been on birth control, and their bodies don't know how to produce those hormones naturally. And so many of them reach out to me, and they also address how it's not even birth control, yes, but also all these other medications that our current culture is blindly accepting, in addition to the birth control, that could complicate things. And there's no studies on everything that's given. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible, because the world truly isn't a petri dish. You can't take everything and isolate everything and try to identify exactly what everything is. All we can do is the information that we have available to us. But even that own information is quite alarming. And in my opinion, I do think that there are certain products that should be pulled from the market for safety studies because of things like birth control and what we know. And you just look at our culture and you look at things that we are struggling with, and we're banging our head against the wall asking, how do we fix this? How did we get here? And then on the other side of I kind of dust through all the cobwebs of the .gov research that I find and say, okay, over here, this information is on the .gov websites. And then I get attacked of people fear-mongering. And that's not my heart. And I believe that's not your heart. And many of the other medical professionals that are trying to ring these alarm bells. So as a culture, I do think that we need to listen, and we need to be more informed about what we do know, so then we can dedicate the research and money and humor and effort to find out more.
Yeah. And again, trying to balance it. I know that there's a particular account I follow where her son was born with a medical condition that was pretty life-threatening and scary, that they had not caught during the pregnancy. She's very, very much so on the holistic side of medical practices. And she ended up being thrust into the more allopathic, like traditional medicine approach, and expressing her gratitude for some of those things. And one of the things that her child had to go through was a lot of procedures that produced a lot of pain. And she talked about using Tylenol because the arnica and the different ones, Copaiba or whatever all else that is available that you could potentially use on infants, just wasn't cutting it. He was clearly in a lot of discomfort. And just the amount that she was attacked
Mm-hmm.
by more holistically minded people for, basically running her child's life because she's depleted his glutathione levels and she's ruined his liver and all these things. And that's why you have to weigh all of the factors and kind of proceed with fear and trembling
Mm-hmm.
instead of just absolute arrogance and confidence on one side or the other.
Right, exactly.
Because you don't want to stomp around in someone's grief and pain and hard medical journey and just tell them, well, you did it to yourself, you took chemo. Well, you did it to yourself, you took Tylenol. Well, you did it to yourself, you're on birth control. That's just not a compassionate way of dealing with people.
Right. When I also have a free motherhood guide, no email required to access. And I go from preconception to postpartum, different things that you could, need to be aware of for nutrition, sleep, pharmaceuticals, different ultrasounds, basically anything that you would need to be researched or to be informed on for pregnancy and postpartum. But one of the things I did a section specifically for C-sections, and I got attacked for doing this by so many people. And they said, you're a home birther. How could you write a section on C-section? I said, there are some people, because they've been injured by a previous C-section or they've been injured by an IUD or some other reason, that they have to have, in order to have a child, they have to have a C-section. And there are certain things that you can do to prepare your body for a C-section. And there are certain things that you can do to limit the known adverse reactions for a child that is born through C-section, like seeding the microbiome. There's so many different easy things that you could do that could set that child and mother up for success. Why wouldn't I address that? Why wouldn't I give them those resources? I have a friend, her uterus ruptured her second pregnancy. So her third pregnancy, she had to do a C-section, and she was so holistically minded that she had anxiety about wanting to have a child because she would have to have a C-section. And so I do try to break that up as much as I can and say that we are a diverse community. The Just the Inserts community is incredibly diverse. We have people that accept delay, decline, any and all medical products. I love that. I think it's great. I detest groupthink. So I do get... I do get kind of attacked from all angles, which is funny because I'm sure you get this too. I'll get one DM that's attacking me for this, and then the next DM is attacking me for the opposite end of things.
Yes, for not doing this. Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And you can't. It's the idea of trying to be all things to all people as much as we're able to, like Paul talked about, where you're not just actively alienating people by being a jerk. Or by claiming things that are the most extreme version and not necessarily true at all times. And then understanding that you cannot please all people. And if there is an opportunity to give them information that they'll need and it means you get attacked, well, then so be it.
Yeah, it's going to happen. And that's one of the things I think you just are expected when you're on social media. And one thing that I really encourage people too is that I'll see someone that shares my research, and you kind of see like the disclaimer at the bottom of this is an anti-vax. This is someone that is just sharing information for you to verify yourself. And I try to catch every single one of those shares because that is brave. Whether you have one follower or a million followers, you sharing information that might not be culturally accepted is brave. And I think that is an important work to shift our culture to have more open and honest and respectful conversations. We should be able to, I refuse to censor myself on social media, and I probably get hit in the engagement, but I shouldn't have to censor myself on saying vaccine or saying, mRNA or different things. I think that is how we change that culture to be able to have it to be a little bit more just open and honest.
And I think that you are a huge component of that, and accounts like yours that are willing to do so in a non-fear-mongering way, in an informative way. And I'm really grateful for you. On the birth control side of things, again, I remember as a 28-year-old, 30-year-old mama being terrified to blog about birth control. Terrified. Not only because my skin wasn't quite as thick yet to all of the attacks from all the sides, and just kind of having to say like, okay, but this is what I'm called to do, so I'm just going to kind of plow forward. And the ones that the Lord brought here that are supposed to say, well, hang on. Exactly. And that's kind of where you have to be once you have done your due diligence to not be a jerk. But also because there were almost no voices in the mainstream, on blogs, on social media, actually talking about some of the things that we just discussed with birth control in that particular area. And so it was really scary because you were genuinely considered a zealot.
Mhm.
Whereas now I see these conversations a lot. I feel
Mhm.
like even more mainstream sources are starting to say exactly what you say you're getting in your DMs, which is medical professionals saying, like, I actually wasn't well informed on this. I myself didn't read the inserts. And now that I have to be really careful that I am keeping my Hippocratic oath to do no harm by informing my patients that this could happen. Might
Mhm.
not be super likely, might be super likely. I think there are some cases where we can honestly say, like, oh, the likelihood is based on the number of instances of harm is, woo, I would be careful with that one. And that is a medical professional's job. That would be, that's, they're not anybody's mom, but it makes me think of, like, if one of my children comes to me and I'm like, I don't know, just do your research, you might get harmed, but all factors are not the same.
Mhm.
Like, I'm like, okay, listen, if you go play in the mud, you could get a bacteria, right? But if you go run across that field of glass, you're going to get cut. Don't do that one,
Right.
I feel like we need some more of that in the medical field where they're
Yes.
willing to say, like, oh man, you know, financial compensation be darned.
Mhm.
I'm going to protect my patients.
Yeah, absolutely. And
And I
you
know that
do.
they exist. I know they do.
Yeah, and we do see that there are certain times in our history where that's been done, and I bravo to the bravery of the individuals that did that. It definitely saved a lot of lives from them doing that. And we tend to have kind of a 2020, what is it, hindsight is 2020.
Mm,
Most of the times what I've noticed just researching different things is that whenever a product's safety concerns is addressed, it's normally when another product is on the market to replace it. And I
mm.
think that needs to get better.
Oh, see, that's an interesting thought, because one that pops into my head, and this is just a little rabbit trail, but one that pops into my head is Ozempic, because I
Mhm.
know that there are even wellness people that are arguing for the fact that it's just a peptide and it helps your body to function better. And then, of course, there's these companies that are like, oh, have you seen all the side effects of it? And it's hard to tell whether it's because Ozempic is cutting in on their kind of territory.
This is interesting. I think you'll find this interesting, and you're probably going to see it a lot more. So there are plenty of people that I follow because I have a personal Instagram where I kind of lay low and just follow all these different pharmacists and different CDC and FDA and different people because I just want to keep a pulse on what's getting ready to come on the market.
Yeah.
And there is now a company that their sole purpose is to address the adverse reactions of Ozempic, and
Mm,
it's interesting because 6 months ago, the narrative was that there's no adverse reactions. It's
yeah.
just a titration issue. Maybe they were just on a higher titration or higher
Right.
dosage than what they should have
Yeah.
been. And now that there's a company to support the adverse reactions of Ozempic, I was just going through the marketing of it. And I said, that's what we were saying 6 months ago. And it was on the insert.
Right.
Why is it all of a sudden now it's okay to talk about it because there's a product for it? And that's where I come through in my business background is, yeah, that makes sense. As a business, you wouldn't want to talk about all of the adverse reactions. You would want to say that they're rare, and you'd probably produce studies. And that is not an outlandish statement to make. That
No.
has been in history. We saw that with the overprescription of opioids. We've seen that with Fenwin. We've seen that with so many different products on the market that eventually got pulled
Or
because
practices like, what was it called when they would, oh, I think of it as nightmare births because that's what it makes me think of. But they would put women to sleep
oh
during their
yes,
labors, and they
yes.
were just told, like, this is the best thing ever,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a common practice, and
Yep.
they assumed that they weren't feeling anything, and then
Yep.
it came out later that they were in, like, almost like a paralyzed state where they could feel everything, they just couldn't tell anybody, and
Right.
they had really terrible effects after the fact, as well as trauma, and
Yeah.
understandably, because if somebody
Yes.
paralyzed me during labor and I was screaming on the inside and nobody could
Yeah.
hear me, that would be awful. I mean,
I
beyond
can't even
awful. Truly,
imagine that.
I don't, Twilight births? Were they called Twilight births? I think
I
that's what
can't.
it was.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what they
But
were,
I
but that
mean,
sounds terrifying.
yeah, it's awful. And it was a practice that was lauded and proceeded on for many years until people finally realized it was barbaric. So
Mm.
just because something is common, doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that it's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well said. I completely agree.
Alexandra, this has been such a good conversation, and I am so excited for people to get their hands on your book and to follow along with you and just to be informed and to feel, I don't use the word empowered very often because I feel like it's overused and misused in many ways, but in this case, genuinely to feel that they have had some power shifted back into their hands, the responsibility, the privilege that it is, because most of the people that listen are parents, but not everybody, the privilege that it is to be given the opportunity to steward our health well. So tell us where we can find you on the internet and all the things. I think we talked about it some, but just give us a rundown.
Thank you so much. That's so very kind. That means a lot. Justtheinserts.com. You can find me there. I have my book there. I have the free training course, the free motherhood guide. I have over 50 pharmaceutical deep dives, all free to access. My Instagram and X, Just the Inserts. I would love to hear from your listeners. And thank you so much for allowing me to come on and share my passion.
Oh man, it was my pleasure. And I loved having you on here. And I know people will benefit so much.
Thanks. You.
Yeah. If you enjoy the MS for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.